This is the legacy interview of Justice Peter Siggins of the First District Court of Appeal. He was the former presiding justice of Division III. I'm Justice Sandy Margulies, and I'll be conducting the interview. So let me start out by asking you something really simple. Where were you born?
I was born at St. Francis Hospital in San Francisco, right here in the city. And I grew up in the Marina District in the city and went, to St. Ignatius High School and then off.
So you're an aberration. You are a native San Franciscan.
I'm one of the few, although we don't live in the city any longer. Now we live in the North Bay. But,
right.
But I'm one of those people that grew up here.
So did your parents, did they grow up in San Francisco, or did they come from somewhere
No,
else?
they both were San Francisco natives. They both were civil servants. My mother worked for the San Francisco Unified School District for more than 30 years, I think, and my father worked for the City and County of San Francisco. He was a deputy assessor, then he was the executive director at the Board of Permit Appeals under Mayor Alioto, and then he was the administrator at the DA's office with DA Arlo Smith.
So I usually don't do this, but let me just go back even further. I want to ask you about your grandparents.
Okay.
Were they native San Franciscans?
No, on my father's side, yes. On my mother's side, my maternal grandmother came from Italy when she was, she would have been about 18 years old, 17 or 18 years old. And my my maternal grandfather's family were Sicilian, but he grew up in the Coyote Valley,
okay,
outside of San Jose, basically. And he was born in California in 1895, but not in San Francisco.
And do you have any siblings?
No.
No? Oh, you're an only child?
I'm an only child.
I didn't know that.
Yes, I know. People just assume that's not the case, but yeah, I'm an only kid. My mom had miscarried a couple of times, but I made it. So.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
We're happy you're here. So you are married to Veronica.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you meet Veronica?
Well, we met in college. We met when I was at Loyola Marymount. She was too. We were classmates. I was actually dating her suite mate when we first met. And then, we kind of had an on and off again romance through college. And at the end of my second year of law school, I was going to go to a wedding that a mutual friend of ours was getting married. So I called her and asked her if she'd been invited. She hadn't, so I took her as my plus one, and that's kind of the end of that. And from then on, we've been together.
So how long have you been married?
We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, so 42 years, or 41 years almost, yeah.
And you have 4 children?
4 children.
And what are their names?
Greg Siggins, and then Lucy, Nora, and Marty.
And I know we talked about this earlier, but what are your children currently doing?
Well, Greg is a judicial assistant for the First District Court of Appeal, which is really a job that he loves and has just recently started, a few months ago anyway. Nora is a reading specialist at a school in Marin County. Lucy is a landscape architect, and Marty is a chef.
Now, did any of your children follow you and go to Loyola Marymount?
Yes, the 2 older kids did. Greg and Lucy both went to Loyola Marymount.
And you have a grandchild.
I have 2 right now.
Oh, 2?
And 1 more on the way. Yes.
So who are the proud parents?
Greg and his wife, Cassandra Cass, are the parents of Ophelia, age 4.
Beautiful name.
And Meadow, age 2.
Those are beautiful names.
Who knows, coming in April, so.
Oh, so they have a third one on the way?
They have a third one on the way, yeah.
So how old are the grandchildren?
4, 2, and
whatever.
Soon to be, yeah.
Wow. So do you and Veronica end up doing any babysitting?
We do a fair amount. When we, especially now that I'm available and around, we do especially with the pandemic and with COVID, with things happen where childcare will shut down for a week or something like that, and the kids are in a spot. And so just last week, in fact, we had the girls Wednesday through Friday, and they just came and stayed at our house for a few days because one of the childcare providers had to shut down their operation.
Yes, and through relatives, I'm familiar with that.
And it's a lot of fun, but it's
situation.
exhausting.
Yes, it is.
I love having them there, and then I happily waving to them as they drive up the driveway and they leave.
So you had indicated earlier you went to St. Ignatius High School.
Yes.
And when did you graduate?
I graduated in 1973.
And are you still on the Board of Trustees?
No, I finished my final term on the board last year, but I'm still relatively involved in the school and am in touch with folks there a lot.
Now, how long were you on the Board of Trustees?
Let's see, probably a little, almost 8 years on the SI board. Yeah.
And were there any particular challenges with which you were confronted while you were on the board?
Well, there were a few things that were, the school was going through a period of transition. We had to find a new president, and we did. We hired a new president while I was on the board. We also did some organizational changes that there was, at the time that I joined the board, there was a board of trustees and a board of regents, a board that was really originally tasked with, friend making more than policy making. And we ended up collapsing those two together and essentially restructuring the oversight of the school.
Were you ever head of the Board of Trustees?
Yes, I was the chair I had a 2-year term as chair. Mm-hmm.
Now, currently, are you active in any organizations?
I'm active in a couple. I'm on the board of the Santa Clara University's Jesuit School of Theology over in Berkeley. And then I am on the board of the California Judges Foundation.
Now, what does that involve?
That's essentially meetings, but it's a grant-making entity of CJA. So
California Judges Association.
The California Judges Association that essentially provides money in scholarship grants and to courts for outreach opportunities.
And how long have you been involved in that foundation?
Well, with the foundation, I think I'm probably halfway through my second year on the board. Mm-hmm. But before that, I was on the board of CJA. Okay.
And any other organizations you're currently involved in?
That's it for the formal ones. There are some ongoing little projects that I get involved in from time to time, whether it's with some of my friends up at St. Ignatius Parish here in the city, or I still sit on the governor's Judicial review committee, for judicial applicants, so I do some of that.
So I just want to backtrack. I meant to ask you, I understand one of your children is getting married.
Yes.
And is that Lucy or Nora?
Nora.
Nora.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good. And the wedding is coming up soon?
Within a month. Yeah, a month from yesterday, actually.
That's great. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
So let me shift to your years in college.
Okay.
So you went to where? Where did you attend undergrad?
I attended Loyola Marymount in LA.
And why did you decide to go to Loyola Marymount?
Well, at the time, I thought that I was going to be in television or film. And
you did? I never knew that.
Yeah, they had a communication arts department. Uh-huh. That was my major. And I really kind of had an emphasis in television production, and I had a minor in English literature. And I went there for that and for the quality, basically, of the faculty in that department at the time.
And when did you graduate?
77.
And how would you describe your experience or experiences at Loyola Marymount?
Very social. I was really, I loved it. I threw myself into it just like a lot of kids, I think, especially, the 70s was a fun time to be in college.
Yes, I know about
and
that.
it was, it was not as, I would say, acutely competitive as it is today. So those were great years. And I made friends there that are still my closest friends,
So as I understand it, you had a very good experience there.
Yes.
Now, let's move on to law school. You went to a law school in the city of San Francisco because you're a native San Franciscan.
Yes, I came home, went to Hastings, and the thing that I remember about Hastings is my folks said, okay, what do you want? We'll pay for tuition or books, which one? And at the time, tuition was $356 a semester, so I picked tuition. And my books were double that. And when I look at what's going on now, it's just very different. But
Well,
yeah, I came home, moved into my folks' house for at least the first year I did, and went to law school. And I have to say I was inspired to go to law school by a professor at LMU, a political science professor by the name of Bill Fitzgerald, taught constitutional law to undergrads. And I took it when I was a junior as an elective. And I remember him handing out the grades and coming by my desk with an exam one day. And he put the exam down on my desk and he said, "You should have taken this class for a grade instead of pass-fail." And I thought, oh. And that essentially started a relationship with him that I think really more than anything sent me on to law school.
So was that your main reason for going to law school, or did you have other reasons?
No, I think that he was the one that sparked that interest. I mean, my family, because my folks were civil servants and had always been involved in government, I mean, we used to talk politics and local government at the table at night over dinner, I mean, I grew up in that kind of a house. Yeah, so I think all of those things combined, that I came out and I thought, do I want to try to get a job as a cameraman in Topeka, Kansas for a while, or do I want to try to go to law school? And I thought, I really like this constitutional law stuff, and so I applied to law school, and fortunately I got into Hastings.
So why Hastings as opposed to some other law school?
Well, I wanted it to be local. I wanted it to be affordable. I wanted it to be here. I applied to USF. I got waitlisted there. And I got accepted to Hastings, so I went to Hastings. Yeah.
Interesting. So when you were in law school, were you active in any groups or organizations?
Not particularly, actually. I clerked as a volunteer clerk for the San Francisco Superior Court after my first year in law school. And then beginning the fall of my second year, I was working at a firm for 16 to 18 hours a week, and I did that through my second and third year.
Now, which firm was this?
That was the firm I started with, was Acret and Parachet. It was a maritime, primarily maritime insurance defense and construction law, and a wonderful bunch of lawyers. And George Parachet in particular was a named partner, and he was just a wonderful mentor to me.
So while you were in law school, I know you had the professor at Loyola Marymount who obviously was a mentor and really inspired you. Were there any professors at Hastings that had a particular influence on you or made an impact on you?
Yeah, there were a couple. Again, constitutional law, I think, is what I really enjoyed, and Ray Forrester was the professor of constitutional law at Hastings that I took constitutional law from, and he was a great influence, and he was a really pragmatic, sound, sounding board. I got to know him reasonably well, and we would talk once in a while after classes, and he really, there's something about his plain-spoken common sense that I really liked, and he was really inspirational. And in other words, there was a professor by the name of Doug Cunningham who was a land use professor, and I took his class. I also found super interesting. I really enjoyed it, and it's funny because I hadn't seen him in 30-something years, and just about a year ago I was behind him at the checkout stand at the market. And I recognized him, and he did remember, so I feel better about that. But after all that time,
Wow,
yeah.
small world.
Yeah, right.
So while you were attending law school, was being a member of the judiciary on your radar screen?
No, not when I was attending law school at all.
So
Yeah.
after law school, you went with the firm you'd been working with.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you did what, insurance defense?
Yeah, I did primarily, I did a little bit of insurance defense. I did a fair amount of maritime work, maritime personal injury work, Jones Act cases, and I did some construction litigation work. But mostly the construction cases, I mostly was preparing and getting ready for other partners. The maritime and the insurance stuff, at the time, it was a firm of about, I don't know, probably 25 lawyers. We had 7 lawyers in San Francisco. The rest were in LA. So that work, I was allowed to, actually go to court on and
That was going to be my next question. Did you try any cases?
Yeah, I tried a couple of cases with them. I actually can remember I did a couple of maritime arbitrations, did pretty well in those. And then the cases that stand out, I had 2 jury trials when I was there. I got a defense verdict in one of them, and I was representing the defendant. And then I had a case where there was an expert witness that we had used in cases, and he had a personal injury case, and the partners assigned me his personal injury case, and I got non-suited in Sonoma County Superior Court after 3 days of trial. So my experience as a plaintiff's lawyer was not very good.
You were more comfortable in the defense.
Yeah, I think basically my own nature. I'm better at giving excuses for my own behavior maybe than anything else, and that made me a better defense lawyer. I don't know.
So how long were you with the firm?
I was with Akert and Parachet for not counting the time as a law clerk. I was with them for 4 years. I was going to become a partner of the firm, and then I decided to go out and hang my shingle by myself.
Right, and but the name of the firm was something in Siggins.
Yeah, German and Siggins eventually.
Okay.
I started by myself, and then Mike German, who is a good friend still, and was a fellow associate of mine at Akert and Parachet, joined me after about a little bit over a year.
So what areas did you specialize in your own firm?
Then we still did some maritime work. We did a lot of, at that time, maritime ship mortgage foreclosures that were on.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was on a lot of smaller vessels, fishing boats and industrial kind of craft, that we had a client who was a lender that was part of the Federal Farm Credit System. And so we did their foreclosure work. And then we did, pretty much everything else we could pick up. I did some real estate litigation. I did some real estate transactional work. We did some insurance defense work, some maritime defense work, and some personal injury. Fortunately, Michael was a much better personal injury plaintiff's lawyer than I was, so we did some of that.
Scarred after your non-suit.
Yeah, we complimented each other that way.
So how long did you have your own firm?
Let's see. Between my sole proprietorship period and my period of working with Michael, it was probably 7 years.
Oh, that's quite a while.
Yeah, it was a while. And then I went to the Attorney General's office.
And that's what I find really interesting. Why did you leave private practice to go with the Attorney General's office?
We were a small firm or sole practitioner for that time. And it was always feast or famine, right? I can remember things like driving back from a deposition in Walnut Creek one day thinking, how am I going to make payroll this afternoon? And then finding a check in the mail from a client. So that it was that kind of stuff, okay. And so and we were expecting Marty, our fourth at the time. And I was working 6 days a week. I'd work 5 days a week for my clients, and then I'd work Saturdays to do the billing and make sure the timesheets were accurate and all that stuff. And I still really don't know fully how this happened, but I think my dad might have had something to do with it. I received an application for the Deputy Attorney General exam in the mail. It just came in the mail. And it said, open position, Deputy Attorney General examination. And I looked at it and I thought, you know what? Yeah, let's see what happens. And so I filled out the application and took the test, and then was offered a slot and took it.
Was this a civil service kind of test?
Yeah, it was the state civil service deputy AG exam. Yeah. Who
was the AG when you?
John Vandekamp.
Oh, it was John Vandekamp.
Was the AG then?
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did you join the AG's office?
I think it was the end of '88 is when I started there.
And were you in
right? Yeah.
88?
88.
Were you in the civil or criminal division?
I was in the criminal division, but I was in what was called the correctional law section. So it was the division that represented California Department of Corrections, Board of Prison Terms, at that time Board of Prison Terms, and the Youth Authority in all of their habeas cases and civil rights cases.
How did you end up there?
They were the ones that were hiring. That's where I got the offer, and I said sure. And you know, I actually, as hard and challenging as some of those defense cases could be, I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed, first of all, it was civil rights cases, so there we are, litigating the Constitution again, which was a lot of fun and interesting. And then the habeas work was also good. So. And the class action cases were interesting.
So did you do much work in court?
Yes. Yeah, I would. I mean, most of the cases, they were filed pro se by inmates.
Right.
So they were disposed of by motion. But, you know, I got to the point where I could write a pretty good Rule 56 summary judgment motion, you know, in federal court. And a lot of Ninth Circuit cases, so. Yeah.
So when did you become a senior assistant attorney general?
I became a senior assistant in the Lundgren years, and George Williamson was the head of the criminal division at the time, and you know, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but I remember George knocking on the door of my office one day saying, "Hey, let's take a walk," and we walked around the block. Up in Sacramento, because I was there for some work I was doing on some case. And he said, you know, do you want to run the section? And I said, sure, right? Why would I say no? Yeah, of course.
So how long did you run the section?
I would say 96 to 99, 3 years that I did that. And then Bill Lockyer was elected. And then that's when I became his chief deputy.
So did you become his chief deputy right after he was elected?
Yeah, shortly after he was elected. There were some rumors about who it was going to be and all that kind of information stuff was going on. And he went around the office and spoke to all the senior assistant AGs. And he came by my office and we sat down and we talked for, I don't know, a couple of hours. And then I heard nothing. And this was probably shortly after he was elected in November of that. And then I remember it distinctly. They called me up and said, can you come up to Sacramento? And it was January of '99, I think, right when the day that Governor Davis gave his State of the State speech. And so I got in the car, went to Sacramento, and I got there, and that's when he and Steve Cooney, his chief deputy for admin, sprang it on me that they, you know, wanted to know if I wanted to be the chief deputy for legal affairs. And I said, again, right? Why say no?
So how did what were your responsibilities as the chief deputy for legal affairs?
At that point, my responsibilities then became oversight of the legal divisions of the Attorney General's office, the criminal division, the civil division, and the public rights division, as well as some of the administrative support for those functions. And it it was kind of like a feast for a lawyer. You know, if you're a lawyer and you like being a lawyer, it was having an opportunity to touch about every area of substantive law in the state that there is.
And am I correct in assuming you were giving Attorney General Lockyer advice?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, there's a very I don't want to say regimented, but there's a formal way that proposals and certain things come up to the Attorney General for review and approval. And the Chief Deputy's job, in large part, is to screen those things
Right.
and make a recommendation. And that, you know, I spent most of my time reading and questioning people about those various things.
So were there any particular issues or cases you dealt with as the chief, was it Chief Deputy? Yeah, Chief Deputy Attorney General that stand out in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. The biggest, the place where I think I made the biggest difference, because I'm not sure that the Attorney General would have done it if I wasn't there, was shortly after the election and before Lockyer had been sworn in, a young woman was shot to death by police in Riverside. And there was a federal civil rights investigation. There was a decision made by Grover Trask, then the district
Right, I
attorney
remember him.
in Riverside, as to whether he was going to prosecute criminally. And he came to a conclusion that that the officers were not criminally culpable for what happened. Our office came to the same conclusion. We reviewed it for possible prosecution. And I said, essentially, I think that we should be looking more deeply. There's things about the events that troubled us as law enforcement officials. And I suggested that we should do a formal inquiry about patterns and practices in the department. That led to a 3-year investigation, pretty much, of the Riverside Police Department, and ended up in a consent decree that really did a lot to restore. And the thing that I think it did the most is restored trust of people in Riverside in their police department, especially people of color.
So I guess I'm wondering, as a result of your investigation, did the Riverside Police Department make any significant changes?
Yeah, very significant changes. Some of the more significant changes, the use of force policies were rewritten, training was improved. I think in some ways, I think the most important thing was they had a very rigid process at the time called post and bid, where officers would bid their shifts.
Yeah.
And if you had seniority, you didn't have to do a graveyard shift. Well,
Right.
that was part of the problem. This incident happened on the graveyard shift. The sergeant in command of the whole incident had, I want to say, 3 years on the force. So it was a very junior group of officers. So we required them to change that process, which was a very, it was a difficult negotiation, but it was something they did willingly and they recognized. Unfortunately, they had a new chief, and that helped too.
Yes, I remember working with the Oakland Police Department, and it was the same thing. And so, same idea. You had younger, very inexperienced officers doing the night shift when a lot of things happen.
When a lot of bad things can happen.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, I totally understand. Is there another case or situation that comes to mind?
I remember I was involved in some of the negotiations in the U.S. versus Microsoft case when the United States and the states were suing Microsoft over Microsoft Explorer, essentially, the web browser, an antitrust case, and developing apps to that. So I remember that, and I was very proud to have taken a part of that.
Did you have much experience in that area?
No.
In technology?
No, not in technology and not in antitrust, but you learn, the thing I always said about the Attorney General's office was that if you're sitting there in the Chief Deputy's office, you get something you've never seen before, and you can say, oh, get me our best expert in this subject. And then an hour later, someone is sitting in front of you and they're encyclopedic. There are people, water law is a subject like that too. I could say, get me that person, I need to talk to him. And he'd be sitting right there in front of me a little bit later, and I'd learn a lot about water law.
So at some point you left the AG's office. And when was that? What year?
I left the AG's office when, shortly after the recall election of Arnold Schwarzenegger and
Gray Davis.
I want to say, of Gray Davis. I mean the Schwarzenegger win in the recall election. So that would have been, I think, at the end of 2003 is what I remember.
And why did you leave the AG's office?
Well, I was sitting there at the AG's office, and Barry Good, who was a Superior Court judge and was Gray Davis's legal affairs secretary, called me and said that the Schwarzenegger people had just been in to see him, and they were looking for a legal affairs secretary. And he essentially said, would you be interested in that? And I said, let me think about it. And I thought about it for about 30 seconds, and I walked down the hall and I talked to Bill Lockyer, who happened to be in that morning, and I said, hey, I just got this call, and I'm thinking it might be a good thing, and it might even be good for the AG's office if I was over there. And, Bill, being the magnanimous person that he is, I mean, he's really great with staff. He said, if you want to go for it, go for it. I'd hate to lose you, but it would be a good thing for you. And I called them back and said, yeah, I'm interested. And the next thing I knew, I was having coffee with some people from the transition team.
So you were the legal affairs secretary for how many years?
2003 until 2006, January of 2006.
And you worked pretty closely with the governor.
Yes.
And what were your responsibilities?
My responsibility was essentially to coordinate the responses to litigation and the policy articulation of the various state departments in response to what was going on in the governor's office with respect to what he might have as priorities in his budget, what he might have as priorities in legislation, essentially to just keep your finger on the pulse of what was going on. I also reviewed clemency applications and did a review of the grants of parole by the Board of Parole Hearings. And, it's kind of a general counsel job. You have in-house responsibilities, for example, advise the governor about the constitutionality of bills and things presented for his signature. And then you have outward-looking responsibilities that are, kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the state agencies and the various lawyers who are managing that litigation.
Now, when you worked for Attorney General Lockyer, at some point did you move up to Sacramento?
Yes, we did.
The whole family?
Yeah.
And then you stayed there once you went over to the governor's office?
Yes.
So how many years in total were you there?
We moved up in 7 years. We moved up in 2000, and we moved back at the end of 2006.
So how would you describe your experience working in Governor Schwarzenegger's office?
Hectic. It was long days, but really fascinating work to do. And a governor's office is a very interesting dynamic. You have senior staff, and they're all very accomplished, smart people, all ambitious, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean they're just on their game, and they're trying to get things done. And so every once in a while, things would come at you out of the blue that you didn't really realize were happening in part of the office, but all of a sudden they were surfacing as part of an initiative or a piece of legislation, and you realize, wait a minute, legal hasn't looked at that yet. We need to take a look at this. And so once in a while, you'd have to put the brakes on everybody, and that would be rare, but it was a very, I don't want to say turbulent, but in the best of times it's turbulent. There are things you don't expect,
Yeah, and dynamic, I bet.
Yeah, dynamic. And, things like a gas line breaks, or, the first floor of the Capitol floods. That happened when we were there. So things like that, make for an interesting career experience.
So you left the Attorney General's office, and why did you leave the Attorney General's office?
Well, I just thought there was a good opportunity for something new and different. And working in the governor's administration, I thought would be helpful. And I did think, I'm trying to be politic about this, but there was a time at the beginning of Governor Davis's administration when I was chief deputy, and the relationship with the governor was very strained. It was very difficult. And they were, of the same party, but you'd think it wouldn't be. And with the Schwarzenegger folks coming in, I didn't want to see that again. I thought, if I'm there, it's going to be a lot easier to transition. Now, in some ways it really was, and we worked very well together. There were a couple of glitches, which are always the case with, strong-willed politicians and their preferences for policy, yeah.
So after your hectic experience in the governor's office, you left the governor's office. And why did you leave the governor's office?
I was tired. I was ready to come home. We'd been in Sacramento for a while. Our youngest, Marty, was going to be graduating from high school. He was going to head off to college or whatever at the time. And I just, I was ready. I was just kind of, I don't want to say worn out, but I was tired. And I went into John Davies one day and I said
and John
to him,
Davies
was the appointment secretary,
right,
whose office was next door to mine, and he was just a wonderful
judicial appointment secretary.
Yeah, judicial appointment secretary. He was a wonderful man, and I said, I'm thinking of putting in an application for the bench, and he was very encouraging. And in fact, more encouraging than I expected, because I anticipated putting in an application for the Superior Court. And John was very vehement about applying to the Court of Appeal. And that's what I did.
So you did, and you were nominated by Governor Schwarzenegger,
yes,
correct?
I was.
And when did you join the First District Court of Appeal?
I joined the First District on January 6th, 2006.
Isn't it funny how we always remember the date,
I remember
the exact
that date.
and
Yeah,
and year?
I do.
And which division did you join?
Division 3.
And who were your colleagues when you joined?
My colleagues at the time were Justice Bill McGinnis, who was our presiding justice, Joanne Perilli, Justice Perilli, and Justice Pollack, who is now the PJ in Division 4.
Correct.
Yes.
So what would you say was your biggest adjustment, if any, to joining the bench?
Well, there were a couple. Well, one was the Court of Appeal is a monastic, studious place. And that was a big change for me. I was used to making a lot of decisions on the fly, kind of going with things through the course of the day. There's two things that I will say. When I came here, when I got the appointment by Judge Governor Schwarzenegger, and before I was confirmed, I came here to visit the division and to say hello to people. And I was here for a couple of hours. And I went home that night and I said to Veronica, I was there for 2 hours and I didn't hear a telephone ring. Yeah. And for me, that was something that was very noticeable. It was like, wow, that's different, because I'm not exaggerating. I'd have 40 phone messages a day at the governor's office, maybe a little more. So that was a change. And then the other one is something I've learned a little bit later as I worked in the job for a while, was that when I was at the governor's office, I'd have these moments when I'd be driving home at night and I'd think, oh gosh, I should have looked at that, or I should have checked this before I said something. In the Court of Appeal, you don't have those moments, because if you think of that, you come in the next day and you fix it and you make sure of it. And so when you file that opinion, you know and you're as certain as you're going to be. You may be wrong, but you're as certain as you're going to be, and you've checked all the boxes, and that's a good feeling.
I like to think of it as you get to catch your breath, think about things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's much more deliberate. It's much more, conscientiously thoughtful that way.
So you eventually became PJ,
Yes.
Presiding Justice of Division III, and then who were your colleagues at the time you became Presiding Justice?
When I became presiding justice, my immediate colleagues were Justice Martin Jenkins, who remains a very good friend.
Yeah, our friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
Justice Petru, Iona Petru, and Justice Fujisaki, Karen Fujisaki.
And how long were you the PJ that division?
A little over a couple of years, 2.5 years just about.
And how long were you on the Court of Appeal?
I was on the court for a little more than 15 years,
So,
which flew by.
yes, they do.
Yes.
So are there any cases that stand out in your mind or any issues you had to deal with?
Well, there were things that we would have to deal with from time to time that, primarily some of the criminal changes to the penal code that we all have had to deal with, whether things are petty theft or not petty theft anymore, or things like that. But, I actually, the work is such that you kind of only remember the last thing you did, right? It's just, that's the nature of the work.
Did you have the experience that you'd work on a case, it's done, it's filed, the petition for rehearing's done, and you just put it in the rearview mirror and move on to the next case?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's because the cases, I can remember details about cases I tried as a lawyer years and years ago. But I can't remember many details about some of the cases I filed here at the Court of Appeal. And I just think it's a difference between having to live with something in your gut for 3 years and having to intellectually figure it out and work on it for a matter of a couple of months, and then
Right.
it's gone, right? But, frankly, the last 2 cases I filed were some of the most interesting cases that I had, and they both came out of the development of some property in the Sacramento or the San Joaquin River Delta without permits, and they were kind of Clean Water Act, Porter Cologne kind of cases, and that was a really, and they might have been the last cases I filed because we worked on them so long, But,
Well, those are also, as you know, when you get into water rights and water law.
yeah,
it's
they
very
were
complicated.
fascinating. It was fascinating stuff.
And there's not a lot in the water code
Right,
to provide guidance.
right.
And some of the
Right.
sections are
Yeah.
very antiquated. So when you were presiding justice of Division III, what additional responsibilities did you take on?
I think the biggest one, I changed the way some of the things were done in Division III just because I thought it was more expedient for us at the time. But the motion work was probably the biggest one, handling the motions and then determining which ones should be done by a panel, which was mostly those motions seeking dismissal that looked like they potentially had merit. If I saw those, I'd give them to the panel, but pretty much I did a lot of the motion work myself. I would routinely talk with our writ lawyer ahead of writ conferences and ahead of writ memos to kind of get a feel for where things were going in that part of the operation. And then, just a question of scheduling things for the division, really. Yeah.
Was there any particular part of being a presiding justice that you found challenging in any way?
Well, I think always when you have more responsibility for staff, it is challenging. And, as you know, I was the chair of our court's personnel committee, so keeping the court fully staffed and adequately staffed, and then the caliber of work that was coming out of staff it's always something that can challenge people. And we were very fortunate in Div 3. We had good folks, but it was sometimes training and breaking in people and trying to cover and fill for vacancies is always challenging.
In addition to being chair of the Personnel Committee, what other committees were you on, or did you chair while you were on the appellate court?
Well, I chaired CalCrim, which was the
That's why I'm asking.
the jury, yeah, which was that was a labor of love. That was a wonderful experience, and I'm grateful for it. That was the work that CalCrim does is very well done, and the fact that you have all these people from disparate backgrounds in criminal law sitting around the table and setting aside their professional objective and looking at the law purely as a matter of let's just get this right was really a lot of fun.
For purposes of this interview and for anyone that watches it, why don't you explain what the CalCrim Committee does?
Sure. What the CalCrim Committee reviews and edits and proposes jury instructions for use by the Superior Court in criminal cases. And so every time there's a change in the law, whether it's a change developed by case law or a change developed by statute, the committee has to take a good look at that and figure out whether either existing instructions need to be modified or new ones need to be written. And you would be surprised at how frequently and how many of those instructions can be impacted, even with one decision. You know, one decision can impact literally 20 or 30 instructions.
And of course, I think what made being the chair of CalCrim or being on the CalCrim Committee particularly challenging was the idea of writing the instructions in plain English.
Yes, plain English, and in a way, not only in plain English, but in a way that can be adapted to every circumstance, which is a real challenge. And fortunately for me, there were people on the committee who had been there long enough that knew the conventions and the formats in a way that really helped the process along. I mean, it can be daunting if you don't have the right kind of help at a staff level as well. I mean, the staff has always been wonderful there.
Well, because you need someone who's got the historical memory.
Yes, historical memory, and knows when something goes in. I mean, you'd literally get to the point where does something go in a parentheses or in a bracket here? And you know, those are the things that you think, why does that matter? Well, it matters when a Superior Court judge is trying to figure out how to give the instruction.
And which bracket or parentheses.
Right, and is this optional or does this have to be used?
So what did you enjoy most about being on the appellate court?
The work. I mean, I really loved seeing the work that came out of the trial courts and you know, seeing the way cases affect, you know, these cases are all about people's lives and what happens to them. And having a role in that, having a part to play in that, whether it's trying to set something right or trying to say something was done right in the beginning, is a real privilege. It's just been, I love the work from the day I walked in the door. And I must say, you know, having not been a trial judge, I was a little bit wary when I first came in here. But my colleagues in Division 3 were just so supportive and so wonderful to work with. And the staff was the best, that I just felt welcome and loved the work from day one.
Is there anything in particular you're most proud of about your time on the appellate court?
I don't know. Nothing stands out. I mean, I hope that I was a good colleague and I was, you know, always attended to my responsibilities and was fair with the people that were in front of me and around me and listened attentively to everyone. So, I don't know. I hope.
So how long in total have you worked for this? Did you work for the state?
Oh, that's a good question.
So,
well, almost 30 years, just a touch above 30 years, I think, pretty much.
So you worked for the state all those years. You worked as a justice in the Court of Appeal for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
What prompted your decision to leave the Court of Appeal and state employment?
Yeah. Well, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and work changed. I was sitting there at my computer all day long. Maybe I'd take the dog for a walk at noon or something like that.
And everybody, at least the first year, was working from
Yeah,
home.
the whole first year was working from home.
Right.
And I just felt a little bit like I was on the treadmill, and I wasn't getting the same sense of satisfaction out of the work. And I'll be very honest about this. I don't feel like I was giving some of the cases the attention I should have given them, and that I would have given them maybe had I been working in the building in the courthouse with the library upstairs. It just, I started feeling like with some of the cases, I was not prejudging, but I thought I'd pick it up and say, I know where this is going. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I started doing that, I thought, I probably shouldn't keep doing this. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yeah, this might be a good time. I'm going to step away and try something else.
So now you've stepped away. What are you doing?
Well, I'm doing a lot of stuff with my family, for starters,
Well,
that
yes,
I
you
didn't do.
You have the grandchildren.
Yeah, I have grandchildren, and I find that I'm available to my kids when they say, "Hey, Dad, can you do this?" or in a way that I wasn't before, and that really is, in a lot of ways, that impresses you with, "Geez, how much did I not do before?" So that's been useful. I've tried to start a little independent mediation operation that will do some appellate consultation and maybe some special master or referee work if possible. But that's just in its nascent stage, and we'll see how and where that goes. And I stay pretty busy, so yeah. There's life after the bench, is what I keep saying.
Well, as I said when I saw you when you first walked in, you look good.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I feel great.
So, are you doing any traveling, engaging in any hobbies?
Not yet, but we will. I have, those who know me know that I have a little vineyard in our backyard that I tend to and make wine from, and I've not said this to anybody, but I've recently started taking cello lessons. And
you're taking cello lessons?
I'm learning to read music and trying to play an instrument.
Now, what inspired you to do this?
I just love the sound of it. I've always loved the sound of it. I've loved the music from it. I've thought about it for 40 years, and I thought, you know what? I'm just going to go try. So my thinking is that I might be reasonably proficient by the time I'm on my deathbed. But I don't know.
So, did you ever take any or play any sort of musical instrument?
I played guitar for a few years when I was younger, but I never really read music like I'm learning to read music now. And I find that at the end of the day, I've kind of done whatever I have to do that day, and then I sit down with that thing and I make noise out of it, and I like it. I enjoy it.
How is Veronica responding to the
She's
cello?
actually okay with it, which I didn't expect. But she, she's more charitable than she probably needs to be or should be.
So how often and how long do you practice?
I practice about 45 minutes a day.
Well, that's very good.
And and I have a lesson a week. So
that's terrific.
Yeah.
Good for you. I'm going to shift just to another topic, which is, how would you describe your judicial philosophy?
Oh, boy.
When you were on the Court of Appeal?
Well, I will say this. My dominant philosophy is get it right. Figure out what the law is, figure out what the legislature's saying, and then apply it and do your best to apply it. Having said that, I'm going to say something that when I was in the governor's office, the legislature was often, and I'm not trying to be pejorative or nasty, but they were often a nuisance. It's a tough, unruly body, and they're motivated by what their constituencies want, and it's a real, it's like the old thing about making sausage, right? So I didn't have a full appreciation for the legislature and the legislative process. When I became a judge and I had to apply and read their words and use their words, I had a newfound appreciation for what happens in the legislative process and what our role as judges is to try to interpret that and use it. And I think it gave me a very healthy respect for what the role, and I think it's a confining role, of an appellate judge is. Yeah.
So it sounds like to me that your judicial philosophy changed during your time on the bench.
Absolutely. I think I'd become more reserved as a jurist. I think I learned a healthy respect for the legislative process, their words, and also for our standards of review as appellate judges and how they confine us in a way that ensures consistency and adequacy in our review.
So while you were on this court, did you ever author any dissents?
I authored a few concurrences. I can recall one I know I did a couple of dissents, but I can recall one of them.
And what did that have to do with?
That had to do with a tort case. That was a case.
Oh, your specialty.
Yeah. It was a case where it was a case involving someone who had fallen while trying to climb in the back of a tenant who fell while trying to climb in the back of their building because they forgot their keys. Mm-hmm. And the majority ruled essentially that there was no foreseeable risk to this person. And maybe, from growing up in the city and my life as a kid growing up in the city, thinking about how many backyard fences I climbed over and how many fire escapes I've climbed up, I said, well, wait a minute, it's entirely foreseeable that if a tenant would forget their keys, that they might try to get into the building this way. I would have done it if I was, 19 or 20 years old, which is what this plaintiff was. So I dissented in that one. I remember that.
And where did the case go?
It went nowhere. The Supreme Court didn't take it. Justice Jenkins and Justice Pollock were obviously correct,
So, do you think the role of the judiciary has changed or evolved since you took the bench?
I don't think the role has changed. I think the public perception of it has changed a lot, unfortunately. And I'm not sure how to best reinforce in people's minds that, people like you and that come in here every day are trying to just do their best for the people that appear in front of them, and that these aren't ideologically driven outcomes. And I'm concerned about that. I mean, I think I have a lot of faith in our country, and I think ultimately things will swing back another way, but I'm not sure what will make that happen. And I certainly think that the perception that the courts are more politically motivated than they really are is something that is unfortunate.
And don't you think that that's one of the challenges that with which the courts are confronted?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the things to confront, and I think the only way to do it is to keep sending the message in as many places as we can.
If you had to do it over again, is there anything you'd change about your professional career?
Yeah, I think. Yes. I think if I were to come out of law school again, I would try to get a job as a prosecutor or public defender right away, just to get the courtroom experience that, when I tried my first civil case, I was terrified. I'd never really tried a case. And I just think to get the experience as a young lawyer of being handed a file and told, go try this thing, and learning that that's how you do it, would have been, it would have saved me a lot of sleepless nights, let's put it that way.
What do you think have been the rewards and advantages of being a member of the judiciary?
Well, you know, the thing that I always felt constraining was that you can't politically express your view, and you can't politically say what you think about a lot of things in a lot of social situations, you know. The advantages are that you're kind of insulated from some of that at the same time. So it's a two-edged sword, right? And one of the things that I feel good about, and why, in part, why I'm not looking to sit on assignment, at least for this period of my post-judicial life, is that I am now backing candidates for local government and in the assembly, and I'm working with people in ways that I couldn't before. And I kind of missed that, to be honest with you.
And of course, with your background in the governor's office and the AG's office, I'm sure that plays into your interest in backing candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, in my whole life, I mean, my father was involved in political campaigns in San Francisco throughout my life, and got me involved in them. When I was 12 and 14 years old, I would be working that coat check at some, you know, political dinner.
So, just out of curiosity, what candidates were you involved with?
Well, my dad had a big role in the Loyola for mayor race in '67. That was the first one that I remember pretty big. There was a local supervisor, Ron Pelosi, who he worked with, and that's not the same as Nancy Pelosi,
right.
but and then there was another local supervisor who was a longtime family friend and a wonderful guy, Bill Blake, who was a county supervisor and then ran for the state senate. Didn't get elected, but ran. And then Arlo Smith, when he ran for district attorney. And I was, at the time, a law student, and I drove Arlo to a lot of his campaign appearances.
So, without telling me who you're currently backing, how are you involved in the current political campaign?
Mostly helping with some consulting on different policy positions, and also you know, helping to get checks and to write checks, which is unfortunately the way the process works, in ways that I couldn't do before, right?
Right, because judges aren't allowed to raise money.
Exactly. And now I can help people get some money, and I can give them some of my own without having to worry about the limitation and things like that.
So is there anything else we should talk about that I haven't covered with you?
Boy, it feels like we covered a lot.
Well, that's the idea.
Here's one thing that I will say.
Yes.
Because it's just an interesting piece of trivia. When I was in college, my father was going to law school at night. And I went to Hastings, and he got out of law school when I was in my first year of Hastings. And then he would just never study, but just go take the bar. And he passed the bar the year after I passed the bar.
Oh,
so that's a
nice
piece
story.
of trivia, and it's something that I always think about.
Now, where did he go to law school?
He went to San Francisco Law School.
Okay. So
he started at Lincoln, and then he ended up at San Francisco Law School. Yeah.
Well, this has been really a wonderful, interesting, insightful interview, and I've learned some information about you I didn't know. Most interesting is that you're playing the cello.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that goes. Yeah.
I'm sure it's going to go great. So thank you very much for engaging in this interview, and I'm sure in the future there are going to be some people very interested in watching it. So thank you, and
thank you.
That's a wrap.